We're based in the Atlantic region. Let's see here. And I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So the Atlantic chapter of Sierra Club is based in Kjipuktuk, which is commonly referred to as Halifax. Kjipuktuk is a Mi'kmaq word meaning great harbor. And it was a great harbor at one time with lots of gray seals and even Atlantic walruses. The Mi'kmaq fiercely defended Kjipuktuk from European invaders, but European ships brought foreign diseases that killed hundreds of Mi'kmaq, leaving them less able to fight off European soldiers and settlers. The Mi'kmaq never surrendered their territory to the British or the French, who fought over the territory. Instead, the Mi'kmaq and the governor of Nova Scotia signed the Treaty of 1752, a treaty of peace and friendship that guaranteed Mi'kmaq rights to fish, hunt, trade in perpetuity. However, the British Crown and later Canadian government did not honor the treaty and instead forced the Mi'kmaq off their lands and into reserves, residential schools, and resigned them to poverty, and in many cases. Modern day colonialism and systemic racism against the Mi'kmaq of Kjipuktuk continue to this day, and we endeavor to be an ally to the Mi'kmaq people. So why are we here tonight? Why are we talking about community energy? I'm going to start by sharing a few examples that these are examples of what community energy can offer, just to give you a taste, and then we'll dive in a little bit more. So in Saskatoon, the Saskatchewan Environmental Society and the solar cooperative that it formed have teamed up with the Saskatoon Car Share Cooperative to provide Canada's first electric car share program, which is powered by 100% solar energy. So that's taking the car share to a whole new level. And this was undertaken by two cooperatives. I also want to talk about municipal utilities. This one in Prince Edward Island in the city of Summerside, there's a municipally owned and operated utility called Summerside Electric. And because it's a municipal utility, that means that the people of Summerside who elect the mayor and the municipal councillors ultimately govern the utility. So there's it's a different relationship than many of us have with our utility, where we're dealing with, a CEO of a private corporation or crown corporation even. And in the case of Summerside, they were one of the first utilities, municipal utilities, to build a wind farm. This was in 2009, and they're now building a solar farm, which will be operational in September. And so come September, Summerside will be generating 65% of its electricity through renewable energy. That's made up of wind, solar, and some backup storage, battery storage. Summerside is also far along in developing a smart grid for the community. You can see there's a lot involved, different infrastructure involving generation of renewable electricity, storage, and sort of connecting all the pieces together. And I reached out to Summerside Electric today and learned that it's well along its way. There's still some communication pieces that have to be put in place, but it's coming along nicely. And I couldn't resist the electric Zamboni. So I'm quite sure that Summerside was one of the first to invest in these in the region. This one they bought in 2014, and it means no gas fumes in the arena, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and these things actually work better and make better ice, and they save the community money in the long run. So that was accomplished by a municipal utility. Here, this is from an article in the Narwhal, and it represents a project undertaken by 3 First Nation communities in northern Alberta that came together to build a solar farm. So it's an example of a small-scale community-owned renewable project. Although, as you can see from the panels behind it, it's not that small. This project, owned by these 3 First Nation communities, will reduce their use of diesel fuel by approximately 800,000 liters, or 25% annually. And obviously that reduces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And it also means fewer truckloads of diesel, driving north of the Alberta oil sands to deliver diesel to these First Nation communities. So hopefully that gives you a little taste of some of the interesting things that community energy represents. I'm looking at 3 different broad sort of categories here, or models: the cooperative model, municipal utilities, and small-scale community-owned projects. Here, just to, it's good to zoom out and see what actually exists today. So I was actually quite surprised to learn that the majority of power utilities in Canada are currently owned by municipalities. And provincial and territorial utilities are the smallest at 9. These are what I more generally hear referred to as crown corporations, like Quebec Hydro, New Brunswick Power, BC Hydro, and so on. And investor-owned utilities refers to the big corporations like Fortis and Nova Scotia Power, and cooperatives. There are quite a few, actually. This is another way to look at it by percentage. One thing I did want to point out is that although it says there are, 24% of utilities are cooperatively owned in Canada, I don't mean to suggest that they're all invested or committed to renewable energy. And in fact, in Alberta, most of the cooperatives are natural gas cooperatives, what we would refer to as fossil gas, because natural gas is as much a fossil fuel as coal or oil. But it's still a cooperative, and that means that it's structured in such a way that the communities that form its membership can influence their, decisions, such as the sources they rely upon. And I just have to point out that this image, if you look above the door, it's the Dinosaur Gas Co-op. And it's actually a real co-op. It still exists today. I'm sure this is a very old photo. So let's just look for a moment at what a cooperative is. So cooperatives are based on the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. This is an internationally recognized set of values. Continuing on, in the tradition of their founders, cooperative members believe in the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. So that's starting at a different place than a for-profit private enterprise, for example. There are actually 7 cooperative principles. Again, these are internationally recognized for cooperatives, but I'm focusing, or I just wanted to highlight 3 here. This voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, and concern for community. So because of particularly the emphasis on democratic member control, co-ops are structured in such a way that its members can actively participate in setting or changing the co-op's policies. Each member has a vote, one member, one vote. And I think co-ops really raise the bar when it comes to how democratic organizations can function. There are different types of cooperatives, and I won't be able to, or different models, I should say. I won't be able to really get into that in this discussion, but just to give you a couple of examples, you can have a consumer co-op, a worker co-op, an investment co-op, and so on. And there's a new documentary just out by Tom Webb. And I think Lindsay's going to put the link in the chat. And the documentary is called Building a Better Economy. And it's a modern day look at cooperatives today and what they stand for, how they work, and why we need them. So now I want to shift gears just to talk about actual renewable energy cooperatives in Canada. So these are ones that have been formed to produce renewable energy. And this is a map we created from data from a new report called A Census of Renewable Energy Cooperatives in Canada. It's a report that was published by the Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives, and it came out last year. If you're interested, you can actually go to their Google Map link, and maybe Lindsay, if you're able, you can put the link to that in the chat, and you can click on any of the cooperatives listed on the map. So, for example, if you're in British Columbia, you could click on any one of the 8 co-ops listed on the map and find out not only, their names, but also what kind of renewable energy they're producing, and get links to their website and so on. These represent wind, solar, and biofuel renewable energy co-ops. I was particularly curious about what biofuel was, and with respect to the map and what cooperatives were doing. So I started poking around to see what was what. And anyway, this is my favorite. So this one is in the Greater Toronto area, and it's called ZooShare. It's an investor-owned cooperative. So there's a minimum investment of $500, and once you're invested, every investor becomes a member of the cooperative. And what they do in this cooperative is they convert inedible food waste and animal manure from the Toronto Zoo, and they process it into biofuel that's used for electricity. And you'll notice it also shows fertilizer, but that is a byproduct of the process. So now on to municipal electric utilities. There, as we saw in the earlier graphs, there are a lot of them, and I think some of them are doing some really cool things. I can't, there are 84 in Canada. I'm only really familiar with a small portion of those, so I'm sure people on this call have their own experiences. But I'll just point out some of the opportunities that I think municipal utilities can provide. And, again, this is Summerside Electric was the first municipal utility I introduced. So this one, Electra Utilities, it's a municipal power utility serving more than 1 million customers in Ontario. It's Canada's largest municipally owned electric utility. I think it came to be that because it merged with other nearby municipally owned utilities starting in 2017. One of the cool things that this utility is doing is they've got a program called Grid Exchange. So I'm just going to try and quickly summarize what I understood from the information. So say you have solar panels on your roof. You're potentially in a position to give energy to the grid, and particularly at times when the utility knows that it's going to have a shortage, or that there's a peak coming and they don't want to have to rely on additional fossil fuels. They've got a system or a program that's driven through an app where you sign up to say, no problem, I will conserve my energy use during that period of time of the day, and feed that energy back into the grid. And those who do that, who participate in this way, are actually compensated financially. And I think there's some sort of point system and so on. What I want to emphasize here, though, is that it's not just benefiting the people who have solar panels, who can afford solar panels or who can afford to get some backup battery storage or have an EV parked in their driveway. It actually brings the rate of electricity, the cost of electricity, down for everybody who's a customer of that utility. And the reason it does that is because it allows the utility to avoid peak fuel costs. Those cost more, they just do. And it also mitigates the need for the utility to invest in big energy infrastructure to meet peak demand times. So it's a win-win. And if you live in a place where your utility doesn't really appreciate your contribution of renewable energies to the grid, you'd probably like a program like this. Another municipal utility, this one in St. John, New Brunswick, they're taking the lead on helping to transition New Brunswick to renewable energy. And they're doing that in many cases despite pushback from the Crown Corporation, New Brunswick Power. Customers are very supportive of their renewable energy efforts and demand side management efforts. I mentioned pushback from Nova Scotia or New Brunswick Power. Recently, NB Power decided that it wasn't going to allow St. John Energy to use its distribution system. So basically it's like poles to connect a new wind farm that St. John Energy wanted to build. And they cited legal constraints, whatever that is. So St. John Energy said, okay, fine, we'll put our own poles in and we'll bring the energy to St. John. And they'll still save millions of dollars because of the cost of electricity that New Brunswick Power is charging. And New Brunswick Power is, it's got its heart set on more nuclear. It's trying to negotiate an extension on coal. And so I say thank you, St. John Energy. Next, talking about the small scale projects that are neither municipal or cooperative. According to the group Indigenous Clean Energy, there are approximately 1,700 100 to 1200 or 2100 micro or small renewable energy systems in place with Indigenous leadership or partnership. And that's Canada-wide, so-called Canada. Oops. I would like to point out here, though, that Indigenous partnership can mean different things depending on who controls the money. As we know, in some cases, a private outside renewable energy company will approach an Indigenous community with a plan they've already, put together, and it's usually for wind energy. And the company will say, we want to partner with you and we'll give you this much money if you let us put our wind turbines here, here, and here. So the problem with this kind of arrangement is that generally they're kind of imposed on the community, and the company and sometimes the band council don't adequately involve the rest of the community in the stuff that matters, like the design of the project, decisions about where the wind turbines should be located, or even about the benefits agreement. And so the more that a project is led by Indigenous leadership and has widespread community consultation that does have free, prior, and informed consent, there will be better outcomes, more favorable outcomes for Indigenous communities and for the environment, quite frankly. So of the three models I quickly went through, this summarizes some of the benefits that I think you'll see in those models: the cooperatives, the municipal utilities, and small scale projects. So the money that those projects bring in, the revenue, it's reinvested either in the utility or co-op or project, or somehow in the community. That revenue is not going back to shareholders in some place somewhere far away. And as some of the examples also demonstrate, it's those municipal utilities and co-ops and smaller scale projects, Indigenous-led projects, that are leading the renewable energy transition. If you're in Ontario right now, you're scratching your head trying to figure out what's up with the transition to so-called natural gas, which is where things seem to be heading. You're also going to see a lot more local jobs. You just do, because these projects hire local, use more people than a corporation with a centralized operation, in another city or far away. The ones that I've looked at, the rates are not only affordable, but generally less expensive. And they won't always necessarily underprice the utility monopoly if they're competing with the utility monopoly, but that extra revenue will go right back into supporting the community. And these municipal utilities, renewable energy co-ops, and smaller scale community projects, they're very reliable. And because they're they're not wasting any of their profits on sending it to shareholders. They operate to continually put that money back into the community and the utility and the grid. I think I'm, oops, sorry, getting away from me here. The other thing I wanted to say is that it's responsive to community needs. So if there's a particular need in the community, one thing I've seen from co-op utilities is that they'll bring broadband internet to rural areas because somebody's got to do it, and a lot of the big telecom companies simply don't want to. The other thing is that these models are quite agile and innovative. And because of their size, they can pivot more quickly with technology and respond to international markets and so on. Also, I think you'll find that they're very financially responsible. A lot of the crown corporations you'll find are billions of dollars in debt, but you're not going to find that with a municipal utility. And their system helps to support more decentralized energy systems, which are more efficient, and they're also more resilient to climate change. And another really important thing is that, it's because they're based in communities, they have a better ability to work with communities to gain social acceptance for a project and a willingness to adapt the project to feedback from the community. So if you're somewhere where people are pushing back on a wind project or a solar project, for example, it's not necessarily that people are anti-wind and anti-solar. You can do that badly. You can put infrastructure where it could be harmful in a community to wildlife and the environment. And also, if you're coming in from the outside and not really talking with people, you're going to be suspect. So I think the renewable energy transition needs community energy. Okay, so I want to talk about energy democracy. I think energy democracy is something that can supercharge the work of energy cooperatives, municipal power utilities, and other community energy initiatives. It also disrupts the dominant narrative that is constantly being put forth by the big power utility monopolies, and oftentimes by governments that say, the technology isn't there yet, we have to wait, let's plan for 2030 or 2050. Energy democracy is like, it fires in a different way. So there's no universal definition of energy democracy, sort of like there is for the principles and values of cooperatives, but these seem to cover a lot of the ground. So the pillars being a belief in the universal access to safe, affordable, reliable energy, that energy should be owned by the community and governed by the community, and that the energy be clean renewable local energy, and that social justice is a vital lens, not a nice to have. It's not negotiable, and that we need to prioritize communities that have been historically marginalized and left out, and that reconciliation is action. It's not just nice words. So, and it's very much about local green jobs with fair pay. And I think in a lot of cases, it will really particularly support rural communities where there is more opportunity in some cases for wind and solar farms, for example. So the energy democracy movement actually grew out of the trade union movement. It was based on growing concerns about workers' jobs and the need for a just transition to a clean economy. In 2012, there was an international trade union conference that brought together representatives from more than 20 countries. And basically, they took stock, and they concluded that a clean and sustainable energy transition simply wasn't happening, and that it wouldn't happen unless the energy system were held by the people and democratically controlled. So what they did was they helped to frame the climate crisis as a democracy crisis. Out of this grew, as you see there, the trade unions for energy democracy, which today is a collaborative of about 100 trade union bodies representing workers in 37 countries. The conference produced a report as well titled Resist, Reclaim, and Restructure: Unions and the Struggle for Energy Democracy. So it's about resisting the agenda of the fossil fuel companies, reclaiming segments of the energy system from private or the corporate sphere, and restructuring the global energy system. The energy democracy movement has been clear from the outset that this is not a question of needing more time for the energy transition to take off. They're saying that the profit-driven, market-based approach to drive the transition to renewable energy simply isn't working, and that we need democratic and equitable structures to support a clean, renewable energy transition. As a global movement, they are aware and working on issues of global inequality in the energy transition. They formed a special arm of the group, and it's called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy South. It was formed to help focus attention on work with the Global South. And unfortunately, we've missed this webinar on March 6th, but I wanted to show you that this is an example of the kind of stuff they're doing. So today there are many energy democracy groups, initiatives, networks, organizations around the world. And if I'd had more time, we would have had a lovely slide with all their logos. But what I really appreciate about the energy democracy work is that, you know, people and groups are connecting internationally. They're sharing resources and experiences. They're holding webinars, and it feels like we can stand on their shoulders. We don't have to start from scratch. Here, the Energy Democracy Project, which is based in the United States, they put out something they call the People's Utility Justice Playbook. And it's a great read. It's free on their website. And it basically kind of walks you through how the utility monopolies are going to play hardball and how you can organize to respond to each of their tactics. And it, you know, even if you're not having to organize your community at this point, it helps you to see through what the utility monopolies are doing. And I found that super helpful and kind of validating and refreshing too. So let's talk about the green elephant in the room for a second. I was reminded the other day by Leslie, who said, you know, what about what the energy clean, so-called clean renewable energy transition is doing to the global south? You know, are we thinking about the impact of extracting those minerals and so on? So this is Al Weinrub. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's one of the longtime advocates and organizers for energy democracy, and he's done some great writing. And I'll just read this quote out for you if you haven't already, because I think it's really important. It says, while energy democracy is reflected in the movement to confront and stop increasingly extreme fossil fuel extraction, shipment, and consumption, its strongest expression is in advocating for an alternative to the centralized renewable energy model of the corporate energy establishment. So I see this again and again where, you know, big companies, big corporations, multinationals are suddenly at the helm of these huge wind projects, for example. In Newfoundland right now, one of the concerns on a small little peninsula called Porterport is that a company wants to put up 164 wind turbines in an ecologically sensitive small area. And not only is that a huge footprint for the environment, but at that scale too, it's having an immediate impact on the global south and the resources needed to supply 164 wind turbines. And the wind turbines aren't actually, would not actually produce renewable energy for Newfoundland, okay? It's a money-making scheme to generate green hydrogen, to ship it to Europe as ammonia, which I learned the other day is a very dangerous thing to put on a ship, actually. It's done to some extent today, but we don't really want to be ramping that up in a big way. So there is a big green elephant in the room, and we need to be thinking about not just growth for the sake of growth, and in fact, looking at how we can rein in the consumption of energy and do it. If we're going to do a transition, do it in coordination with communities in the global south, in the way that I think cooperatives can show us the way, quite honestly. You get cooperatives in the global north that are partnering with cooperatives in the global south and paying fair wages and making sure things are done at a scale that's good for the community that's producing. So that's my presentation. I was hoping it would end 10 minutes ago, but we still have plenty of time for questions and discussion. And for anybody who needs to jump off now, here's some ways you can stay connected with our work. And we have some resources on our campaign website, beyondclimatepromises.ca. You're welcome to reach out to me by email. And, this initiative will rely on support from you, the wider community, to kind of help people understand what community energy and energy democracy could bring to our neck of the woods. So I'll stop sharing now and try and find myself. There I am. Okay. Maybe Ocean, if you want to put speaker view on so that we're not having to see the blocks for you and Lindsay right at the moment. Thank you for your comments in the chat. All right, let's, there will be a recording, and it'll go out sometime tomorrow to everybody who registered for this call. So I'm going to open the question piece here and see if anybody has some questions. Okay. And Ocean, I'll just ask you again if you're able to.
I did do it from my side.
There we go. No, apparently you're the host, Ocean. Okay. You know what you could do though, Ocean, is hide. There. Okay. And you can also hide your self view. Okay, great. Well, this is good enough. So there was a lot of chat is disabled, but okay. First question here from Christopher Roy in Toronto. Oh no, this is who you are thing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
We have some questions in the regular chat tonight.
Okay. Do you want to read them out to me? Would you mind?
Several people have asked if, in addition to the recording, if they can also get copies of the slides that you presented tonight.
Likely, although I want to make sure that I can present it to you in a way that will make sense, because in some cases the slides on their own might not quite do the job. So I'll put a pin in that one, and I'll let you know. But likely we can share those as well. And they might be useful for social media, for example, if you want to use them that way. But if you want to share them as a conversation with people, I would suggest sharing it as sharing the video recording, so they make lots of sense.
And we'll also be sharing some follow-up links
Yeah.
after the presentation, just so everyone knows there's been a lot of interest in links to different reports and stuff that you referenced. So we'll get that to everybody.
Okay. Lindsay, did you see another question?
It's not a question, but there is a comment about a wind project in Newfoundland using so-called Indigenous partnership.
Mm-hmm.
WEGH2O, it's called.
Yeah, so that's, so the question is presumably what's up with that?
It wasn't phrased as a question, but I think that we all have seen some examples of that. So maybe how can people best respond to a situation like that?
Yeah. I can't answer how do you respond, but I can share that it's a challenge. We know that there are communities, Indigenous communities, that have supported pipelines and large fossil fuel projects, and even mega dams. What I do know from working with Indigenous communities is that, in some, there's kind of separation or disagreement between the band council and the traditional elders, and not just the elders, but many cases the wider community that that's following the elders and is concerned about protecting the environment. So there's always this tension between jobs and the environment when it comes to these projects. And people can't be faulted for wanting a decent job that puts food on the table. I think that if some of the government tenders, for example, for wind energy projects were structured differently, it would actually help Indigenous communities to create and lead projects that would benefit their communities and allow them to hire local workers. But right now, it's all about the price. So it's kind of like having to deal with Walmart or Costco coming into your community. And you always end up making huge compromises when that happens. So I think, the more we can be real allies to Indigenous communities and support Indigenous rights, not just with platitudes and stuff, but, talk about the land back movement, talk about real consent, and make the opportunities more available, then I think we could see a difference.
Leslie asks, how do you think this might be the beginning of a larger discussion? That's about your presentation, not the
Sure.
last response.
Well, I mean, I think, there are lots of us on the call and we could all have different opinions on that. One of the things I wanted people to, Leslie, I just want to make a quick note of a conversation happening there in the chat about jobs. One person was saying that renewable energy jobs tend to only happen in the construction phase, but then, somebody else responded, actually, when you have a municipal utility like Summerside Electric, there are 174 full-time, well-paying permanent jobs, which is pretty cool. And I've spoken to people in that community and it's the real deal. I think if you're already living someplace where you're served by a municipal utility or a cooperative, utility cooperative, then you should be learning about it, finding out how it works, when their meetings are, and get involved. Because those are structures that people like you and me can have some say in. We're not going to be invited into the boardrooms of the big utility monopolies, but we do have a right to show up at our municipal council and ask questions, and to show up at cooperative meetings and ask questions, make suggestions, and so on. Also, I'm hoping that this presentation sheds some light on what's actually possible, and gets you thinking about why it's not happening on more, I thought one of the areas that we might find ourselves in at this point would be, what are the obstacles and challenges and all the what ifs, doubts and concerns and so on, because, there are lots of legitimate ones. But I think if this is a conversation that people want to continue to have, then, we'll find a way to support that. And as I say, there are a lot of resources and groups already involved in energy democracy work. And in Canada, the renewable energy cooperatives are going to be meeting in a few months to discuss whether there's an opportunity to form a federation of renewable energy cooperatives, because one thing that they're aware of is that although there are many right now in Canada, they're all kind of operating in silos, because energy is a provincial jurisdiction for the most part, and a federation may help not only the renewable energy cooperatives that exist today, but help to support new ones coming online. Personally, I would love to see a program that offers mentorship to communities, so that you'd have, a community like Summerside able to mentor a community in Northern Ontario that, wants to find a way to do renewable energy for their community. And I should mention too that it's not just about generating renewable energy, it's finding ways to reduce energy consumption. And there are a lot of technologies right now that communities can avail themselves of if there's some financial support to do so. So all this to say, I don't think I've answered the question of how do we continue this conversation, but I'd say, reach out after this webinar, tell us what your interest is. If there are people on this call who have skills and resources to share, it would be lovely to meet you and begin to put together a bigger list of people who might come together to help steer some kind of community energy workshop, for example. Because what I've given you tonight is just a taste, an overview, which I hope will whet your appetite and get you thinking and talking. I see there's lots of chatting going on.
Yes,
unfortunately, I'm not able to keep up as I talk.
That's okay.
Um,
Anne has asked, what are the first steps to starting an energy co-op in an area where we don't know what would be the best resource to pursue? Or would energy efficiency be a good first step?
So I can't answer that. Great questions. And there are people, some of whom are likely on this call, who can answer those questions. This helps to shape, the kind of need that I think we have for a Canadian network or working group to talk about options and where to find those specific answers. I think, you'd want to be talking with municipal utility people, particularly ones in your region for starters, and other experts. So I think, I personally would love to keep working with this kind of stuff. But, we'll have to see if there's enough support and funding to kind of keep this support and conversation going.
Lynn asked, you suggest that there are 52 projects across the country, but there are more than 100 Indigenous clean energy projects, so I'm wondering if there are a lot more than 52. But I think 52 was specifically about renewable energy cooperatives, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And 52 represents the ones that are currently active. And the reason we know that is because there was a census published last year that, did find out that there were 52 active ones and a number of inactive ones currently. Apparently, a lot of the ones that are now inactive are in Ontario. For anybody who's familiar with the feed-in tariff programs, those are government programs that help bring renewable energy projects online, and oftentimes cooperatives were formed to take advantage of those. But then when the government cuts the program, things dissolve. So in terms of the other part, though, about Indigenous-led projects, the figure I cited from Indigenous Clean Alliance, they referred to a lot of the small-scale projects, and there were large ones too, but I chose to focus on the smaller ones.
How are the communities able to get energy developers to work with them? Is there money involved that communities can access from the government or other grants?
There is money, and depending, there's federal money. Municipalities can also reach out to their municipal federations, both provincially and the National Canadian Federation of Municipalities. Also, I'll mention a really good network too called Climate Caucus, which is a group of elected municipal officials or senior municipal officials who, just as I say, it's a network. They network with support from Climate Caucus to find out, what municipalities are finding helpful. They're giving them ideas, resources, contacts. So, if you're a municipal employee or municipal elected representative, reach out to Climate Caucus, find out what they're doing. And if you're not, tell your counselor to join, because they can learn some things that way. I'm in Halifax. I know that Halifax has funded positions for the municipality that support the development of renewable energy and energy transition work. So conceivably, somebody in Halifax could reach out to that municipal staff person and say, hey, my neighborhood is talking about doing this. Is there some funding we could apply for? How would we do this? But there's no magic bullet. And as people have said to me over the years, this work is not for the faint of heart. Not much worth having isn't. But I think, the more people are working collectively to find these answers, obviously the more effective it's going to be, and the more rewarding it is as well, because it's hard. I mean, you can see grants that look like the perfect fit, and you apply, and then you find out, 100 other people applied for the same grant, and they only gave out 3. So I'm trying to be realistic as well. But I think the more you try, the more you learn what needs to happen, and you can be having the right conversations and challenging your utilities and your elected representatives.
We have another practical question here. Does a small community have to make a survey to start a project?
Well, I think it depends what your project is, right? And how what the boundaries are, like I could, if you decide tomorrow that your neighborhood would be a great place for a community solar garden, I don't know. I mean, I definitely want to ask my neighbors, but I don't know that you have to do a big survey. Certainly not in the initial stages of having a conversation and making some inquiries. I think, the more you can hold kitchen table meetings or, church basement meetings, community center meetings, and get people out and find out what they're passionate about doing, because there's so much to be done, right? It's not like there's only one thing that has to be done or whatever, and there are different ways to do things. So I would say, look at the people around you, be realistic about your own skill set, and what you actually want to do, what you want to bring to this. If you're somebody who hates doing a particular task, you may not want to create a project that is going to have you doing that for hours on end. Anyway, I don't know if that's helpful, but those are my initial thoughts on that.
What change can we make to the provincial law so that we can use all of the energy we would produce from solar panels, for example? Because now in New Brunswick, NB Power is blocking people and cities from building their own projects.
Yeah. New Brunswick Power is an example I raise frequently when people in Nova Scotia say, we need to take back Nova Scotia Power and make it a Crown corporation. And I say to them, be careful what you wish for, because New Brunswick Power is a Crown corporation and it's awful, as anybody in New Brunswick can attest. I think, it's tricky. I think municipalities have to get noisy. And I would be chatting with the municipalities in New Brunswick that already have municipal utilities. There are 3. St. John Energy is the largest. Begin to learn more about how municipal utilities accommodate solar energy and support demand side management, they call it, which means basically, helping customers understand how to minimize their energy use at particular times of day, or reduce it overall through efficiency and so on. In the case of St. John Energy, they're basically transitioning their model away from simply supplying electricity to their customers, and they're becoming a full service utility that cares just as much about renting them heat pumps that they service. So that's an example of how a municipal utility is agile and can see the writing on the wall and see, oh, actually our community needs this now, not that. And New Brunswick Power, be noisy. Sierra Club is doing what we can to help with that. But they're, they don't have a real plan to get off of or to transition to clean renewable energy, and they know it.
Sticking with NB Power.
Must have a lot of New Brunswick people here.
The city of Moncton has built a big solar plan for more than 8 years now, and this has been blocked by NB Power and a provincial law. The plan is already made. Where do we go from here?
Okay, call me. No, seriously, reach out to me by email, and I'll connect you with some people in New Brunswick you should be talking to. And also bring it up at the next Climate Caucus meeting if you're involved with that. And there is an Atlantic Climate Caucus chapter as well. I suspect I may have crossed paths with you at one of those meetings, but yeah, I think if you've got a plan, now you need to be connected with people who have the expertise. And I'm not going to be able to advise you as, in terms of anything technical. But I think you want to connect to people who can help you push politically, but also utilities who know how it's done.
Wonderful. Are Indigenous people and communities benefiting from renewable energy projects in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia?
I think there are some. I think it depends which ones you're talking about, and I'm not well positioned to speak to that. But yes, I do believe that there are renewable energy projects, in Canada that are actually Indigenous led and that are making a difference.
Cliff has commented that smaller local microgrids connected to other smaller local microgrids, connecting as a unified regional grid, all working together, can offer many local jobs and also make for a resilient grid that can stand up better against the worst effects of extreme weather disturbances and climate change. People often have this idea that one central hub for power is going to be more resilient, but that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah, and in fact, the IPCC report on adaptation said just that. They said, and this was in their report last year on adaptation and resilience and so on. They basically said we need to be looking at ways to decentralize energy systems, and that involves, microgrids. And microgrids that connect to other microgrids, that's great. And distributed energy resources, which refers to, if you can put panels on your roof or tap into an electric battery charger, those things all help. And I hope we can get to a point where we're not capped by the utilities, whereby we can only produce as much renewable energy as we can consume ourselves, but that we can work towards removing that cap so that, if you're a company or a homeowner or a landlord who's got lots of room on your roof, you can even offer it freely, to the grid. Wouldn't that be great? Because we need to do everything we can to get off fossil fuels and bring down the cost of energy for people, because people are hurting. And fossil fuels is the worst when it comes to cost, and the worst for the planet, as we know.
Speaking of rising costs and being bad for the planet, segue to Nova Scotia Power. We have a question: is there anything you can do in Nova Scotia where 90% of the grid is owned by the private corporation, Nova Scotia Power?
I think that we are, and I think we have Nova Scotia Power on the defensive, and I say we as, a large segment of the public, government, and groups like Sierra Club, which keep hammering home that business as usual is not an option, and calling them out on their disinformation and overreach. And I keep pointing out, it's not that, as my friend Tom Webb in the chat here would say, it's not that they have horns on their head. People they can be nice people, whether you work for Nova Scotia Power or something else. But the structure of the corporation is such that the role of Nova Scotia Power is to generate profits for its shareholders. That's its job, its first job. So we have a fundamental conflict of interest, and we need to be able to call that out and say, look, maybe we're just not going to be able to work together for too much longer, or we're going to have to do it differently. I think there's a lot to be said for Nova Scotia buying back the grid and making it much stronger. If you live in this province and you look out the window and see a bit of snow and wind, you hold your breath because the power might go down. Apparently that's not normal across Canada, but it's come to feel that way here in this province. Lots of nice comments there. I hope people are taking a moment to, glean some of the expertise in the chat. And thank you for your kind comments too.
Before she had to leave, Lynn commented that it would be great to have like a monthly get together where people could network and learn from each other, or at least meeting again on the topic, perhaps in the form of a workshop of how to get started, that some of the great co-ops could participate in.
Yeah,
it seems like there would be a lot of interest in the how-to side.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe what we can do as a next step, I see it's 8:32 here in Chibuktuk. We'll send out the recording tomorrow. I invite you to share it with others, spread the word, see if people in your area are interested in the conversation. And then maybe we'll send out a survey next week to see, what kind of things people would be interested in participating in as a next step. And then we can make some kind of offering, hopefully, at that point. Sound good? Good. I like those thumbs up. It's so fun. You see these hearts and things moving up the screen. So listen, maybe we should sign off here and hopefully come together again. And, feel free to reach out to me by email. We'll, stay in touch if you want to stay in touch. And if you have expertise and skills that can contribute to guiding this conversation, let me know, because we need lots of good people helping us along here. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening or a good rest of the afternoon wherever you are.